Hey, welcome back, Warrior Next Door listeners. Today we dig deep into the archives to the second interview that we ever conducted as volunteers for the Library of Congress. Ryan and myself, your co-host Tony Lupo, had a chance to meet with Frank DeCicco back in 2003, and he shared with us tales of his time as a waist gunner on B-17 in the European Theater of Operations during World War II, in and around the time of the Battle of the Bulge. You're going to want to listen in. There's some amazing experiences that he shares with us, so check it out.
Hey, all right. Welcome back, everybody, for another great series that Tony and I have on tap for you. My name is Ryan Fairfield.
And I'm Tony Lupo.
And we are the Warrior Next Door podcast.
Yeah.
We've got one of the earliest interviews that we did. I say, like the second.
I think it was the second one after Allen
gosh.
Sr. Yes.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, we've got a B-17. Well, he was a waist gunner. Is that correct?
Correct.
We have Frank DeCicco, a B-17 waist gunner that flew with the 303rd Bomb Group out of Molesworth, England. And this is an very interesting interview. I have to admit, Tony, whenever I saw the clips, I forgot what Frank looked like.
Yeah.
He looks totally different than what I remember him looking like, but his voice, that sounds exactly the way I remembered him. So tell us a bit, Tony, about Frank's background, how we met him, and then we can go from there and go right on into the clips.
Yeah. So in the same way that we were introduced to Al Sr. through the Commemorative Air Force in Houston, that you and I were members in when we lived there in 2001, 2, 3, and 4. We had a lawyer named Don Johnson, very memorable name for at least people who grew up in the 80s watching Miami Vice, who would bring in veterans that he met through the course of his business and basically do a little impromptu, maybe 10 or 15-minute interview. And Frank DeCicco was another one of these vets that he brought in that we had a chance to listen to. And in fact, in one of the clips, you're going to hear Frank referring to that interview by Don Johnson at the Commemorative Air Force. And so in the very early days of us sourcing interviews, they came from the Commemorative Air Force. They came from Don Johnson bringing people in. And then over time, those people started recommending other people. And then it just blew up and it was word of mouth. We never had to really rely on the Commemorative Air Force much longer after these few interviews, but this is one of our earliest ones. This one took place on February 26, 2003, and we're going to take you back down memory lane, Ryan. So the location was in Katy in a place called Number 6 Kitty Hawk Drive. Now, Kitty Hawk, of course, is a very famous place, the first in flight, the place where the Wright brothers launched their rickety-ass freaking biplane that would end up being a direct lineage to what's going on right now with Artemis II.
Was made out of bicycle parts, wasn't it?
Pretty much. They're bicycle mechanics, two brothers putting an airplane together. It was amazing. But what do you remember about this neighborhood that made it special?
Oh, my gosh. It was built on an airstrip.
Yes.
It was one of those communities that had an airstrip in the middle of it, and everyone that lived on that in that community had their own hangar.
Yep.
And were pilots. They had planes. And one of the awesome things that he did whenever we got there and first met Frank, pulled up to his place. I remember it vividly. It was a mansion. It was a beautiful place. He had his own hangar attached. He had a King Air in his hangar, which is a twin engine turboprop. And he took us on a golf cart tour around the area. Tony, tell us what we saw as we drove around that airstrip and went into other people's hangars.
It was amazing. So a lot of people like to buy a house on a golf course and a country club. And instead, this was built around, aviation. There was one of his neighbors in his hangar was restoring a Spitfire, an honest to God British Spitfire. I can't remember which mark it was, but it didn't matter because it was a Spitfire.
And it was a Battle of the Britain veteran.
So probably Mark one,
the plane,
two,
the plane
three,
was, yeah.
Probably an early mark. And the restoration was almost done. When we had a chance to look at it, they had the hood up, right? They had it cowling off. You could see the Merlin engine. The plane had been painted. It looked like you could fly it out and go shoot down, BF-109s. It was amazing that we're at this dude's place. He's like, hey, let me show you something. And he rolls in there and we're looking at a Spitfire being restored. It was awesome.
What did he? Wasn't there a second warbird in the hangar? I can't
I'm
remember. It seems like there was like a Wildcat or something like that in there. I don't remember. Maybe it was a Mustang, but there was like, but the Spitfire is what we both obviously
yeah.
glommed onto.
Yeah, that is what I remember. It wouldn't surprise me if that same individual, it's like people who work on old cars, right? They typically don't have one, especially if you're wealthy and you've got a hangar or a large garage. So it wouldn't surprise me if they had that. But it was really special. And these were really early days for Ryan and I to meet these World War II veterans and have them tell us their stories and also get to know them. It was really cool.
One of the things I want to mention about that Spitfire before we move on, I saw years later on the cover of like a Warbird Digest magazine, that very
Yes.
Spitfire had just sold for some crazy like $9 million or something like that. And I'm like, that is the
Yeah.
plane that we looked at in the hangar. And I remember walking out of that hangar with Frank. Thank God we were with Frank. And it was me and it was Tony and my other friend, Todd Lannert.
Hmm.
And we're all there. And I'm like, we just walked into a hangar where this Spitfire is. Somebody gonna like shoot us or something? Because
Right.
this should be high security. I felt like because
Yeah.
this is a highly valuable item here, you know. But anyway, we never even met the owner. We never got to talk with anybody. We just pulled in, looked at it, and left, and kept driving.
Yeah.
So
It was just a looky loo, and it was really awesome. And just a few more things about kind of the setup before we get in these clips. So a couple of things because it's an early interview, the content can be a bit disjointed because we were still stuck in the let's ask these certain questions to every veteran phase, which meant there were times when the veteran said something about the question we asked that we should have followed up on and didn't because we were too busy thinking about the next question to ask.
well,
So
didn't
this,
I? And I kind of led the interview, and I think that was the handicap right there. I think I was the guy who was kind of asking the questions, or maybe it didn't come out that way. That's what I
no,
thought. But
it was you, and then I would ask follow-up questions, but it was something that we
okay,
both did early on. I mean, it wasn't like this is what Ryan did and I did it perfectly. We were both kind of
no,
committed to that packet that we downloaded from the Veterans History Project website. It didn't take us too long to abandon that and have more free-flowing interviews. But this one does have that. And why am I mentioning it? Because there are going to be certain times where no matter how I tried to organize the clips, we're going to have to kind of come back around in time where he talks about something earlier. I couldn't quite keep it all chronological. So, listeners, you're going to have to listen to all the episodes because there's good stuff throughout all of them. It's not like, oh, this is what happened in the war and then it's over. He's going to make comments on that. The other thing is this is again 2003, and in February 26th, this was the run up to the I don't know if it was Desert Storm. I think Desert Storm was the first one. I think this was Desert Freedom, the Gulf War, where you had George W. Bush, the son, basically giving Saddam Hussein an ultimatum saying, give up your chemical weapons and all the other stuff, or we're going to come in and invade. And so there was a lot of really newsworthy thing going on. And Frank DeCicco was a bit distracted at times by that. He had his TV going on in the background. And I don't include this in the clips, but at one point we literally stopped the interview so he could go listen to a speech by George Bush that was given an update. But I will say, and lastly, is he also had, remember, he's older, he's in his 80s. He also had a hearing problem. So there were times when our questions that we asked were to kind of drift a little bit. But I would say, after re-listening to this interview for the first time since 2003, so it's 23 years ago, I thought the sound quality was really good, and I thought I was really surprised at some of the experiences he had that I'd forgotten about. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know Frank saw that or was a part of this thing. So I'm excited about sharing one of the OG interviews, one of the earlier ones that we did with our audience today.
all right. Well, you want to dive in? I'm ready to get going on this.
So am I. So he's going to talk about Pearl Harbor and how he got involved in the war effort.
December 6th, I turned 18 years of age. And the next day, of course, which was Sunday, and my brother and I were in the theater, as I was telling before. He announced, the manager came out on the stage and announced that the Japs had attacked in Pearl Harbor. Of course, we didn't know where it was or really what that meant. And as the day proceeded, we again learned more and more about it. And of course, It was all radio then, no TV. So
Where were you living at the time?
at Catskill, New York. That's a small town, 20 miles south of Albany on the Hudson River.
So were you drafted then, or did you enlist?
No, I was, I just had the last semester of high school, and I completed that in June, and in July, I entered the National Preparatory Academy at Cornwall on the Hudson, which was a prep school for West Point and Annapolis. So I spent about 2 years there. I studied for the appointment examination, and then took the first 2 years after I was notified that I had received a first alternate appointment. Unfortunately, the first alternate appointment was not a principal appointment, and I decided then, since I found out there was going to be no appointments the following year, that the best thing I could do is go ahead and enlist or volunteer for induction in the Air Force for pilot training. That's what I did. Unfortunately, that was, by the time they called me, it was almost the 1st of January, 44. And at that time, of course, they had a tremendous reduction in pilot training. So I volunteered for combat, because I was told if you were ex-combat, you had a priority in the pilot training, which we did. And for a while, I was never sure that I was going to get back to get into pilot training, but I did make it.
So this is a recurring theme, Ryan. In several clips, he talks about pilot training. He wanted to be a pilot. He literally joined the war effort where he could die because he wanted to get trained as a pilot. This guy lives on an airstrip, so he would eventually become a pilot. But we're going to learn more in a few other clips about the genesis for his love for flying. But he's right. Timeline, January 1944. This is before D-Day, which is June of that year. And this is around the time when the 8th Air Force in Europe had really staffed up. We had fighter protection. We were starting to dominate the skies over Europe. There were still a lot of men dying, but the tide had turned in the air war, and a lot of it had to do with all those pilots that were trained in 42 and 43 making themselves available. So Frank went in there. It's like, look, I want to be a pilot, but they had too many pilots. So when he said he signed up for combat, what that meant was he'd be in the Air Force, and they would assign him wherever they needed him. He did not have a choice in this matter. And that's a big deal, because if you heard earlier on, he was actually a second alternate or a first alternate for West Point Academy. That's
Wow.
what he was waiting for. He was going to school, kind of like these ASTPers in the Army, who were college educated men who were going to be groomed to be officers during the war. And at some point during the war effort, we needed those men as replacements, and they were pulled out of these universities and put into units right around D-Day. Well, in the Air Force, the Air Corps, a similar thing was happening. You just didn't need as many pilots. They needed navigators, bombardiers, waist gunners, tail gunners, ball turret gunners. And so he joined the military, but you heard him at the very end. His ultimate goal in mind was to become a pilot in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's you know, a lot of these guys that we talked to that did go into the Air Corps, like Alan Sr., Gerald Gentis, wanted to be pilots. That was their first choice, was to be a pilot and everything. And then they got in there, and you know, all of them became waist gunners. All three of them did. You know,
it reminded me of when I joined middle school band for the first time. You were forced to join band. Everyone wanted to be a drummer. Everyone. And so, you know, you had 4 or 5 drummers. Everyone else had to pick a different instrument, and he had to pick a different instrument. And as you already alluded to in the intro, he would be a waist gunner. And in fact, in this next clip, he's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Okay.
Well, I had planned to go into the Air Force anyway, because I started flying in 1939. Had a guy that used to come in with an old Waco biplane that looks something like a Stearman, but it's a fabric covered, you know, very light aircraft. And he used to come in and land near a golf course that I used to caddy on. And as soon as he'd come in and land, I'd jump on my bike and ride over there and get gasoline for him and things of that nature. And usually in the evening, he would take me up for a ride and let me handle the stick. That sold me.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the summer of 39. Oh, there wasn't much as far as boot camp is concerned. I was in pretty good shape because I was playing football. And when I went in, the physical training just didn't bother me. I enjoyed it. I was always sort of a team player anyway, and I liked to be around with a bunch of guys that liked the same thing. And they seemed to be all the same mold that I was from.
So you ended up as a waist gunner on the B-17.
Well, I was checked out in most positions as far as the guns are concerned. I also was checked out as a toggler, but never got to fly on the nose because we became a lead crew. And with a lead crew, you have to have a lead navigator, lead bombardier, and they all have to be qualified to fly in that lead plane. So consequently, they weren't going to put a toggler up in the lead plane because togglers didn't have the bomb sight. Only the rated bombardiers had a bomb sight. Fact is, there were only two aircraft carrying the bomb sight in a squadron of 12 airplanes. And the lead and deputy lead were the ones that carried the bomb sight. And of course, the lead plane would salvo, and then either lead or deputy lead would salvo their bombs. Then all the other planes in that squadron, as they passed over the target, they spaced the bombs like 250 feet apart, that sort of thing. And you just set your counter dial, and that's all it would drop is what maybe you had 20 bombs, you want to drop 10, so that's what you set your counter dial on. Then the intervalometer spaced the bombs. So we were checked out on all positions. We even got stick time. Anytime we went up for a practice flight, one by one, we went up to the cockpit to fly the airplane as well as we could. In the air, it isn't that difficult to fly an airplane in the air. The difficulty is, well, I would say the difficulty in combat is the fact that you're terribly overloaded, way over the max load that you should be. And so it was touch and go. When we went across that fence at the end of the runway, we weren't more than 10 or 15 feet above it, and pulling the wheels up to make sure they didn't hit. And then we had to climb out through clouds in a circle until we got to our rendezvous, where we would rendezvous with other planes from our squadron, and then go off to another area where we would form up and fall into the bomber stream. So anyway, that was, as far as the training, it lasted a very short period of time, because I think it was right around the first part of February. So it was 8 weeks of gunnery training in Laredo, Texas. And then I went to Lincoln, Nebraska, where we formed up. We had 10 guys on the crew. One guy didn't make it. He just couldn't handle it. It was beyond him, so we went to the flight surgeon and had him grounded, because he wasn't going to be any help to us. And he would have been the other waist gunner. But when we got over to Aylen, we dropped one waist gunner anyway, so I was the only one in the waist if I was flying on the waist of the airplane. But I flew tail, I flew ball, whatever, but I didn't like the other positions. So I like to be able to walk around and look, out the windows and watch the wingmen to see how they were performing. Usually the people in the other airplane, you can see them and you make all kinds of motions and whatnot. I won't do it here.
So first of all, I think you're muted, Tony.
Yeah, we know what one of those motions was, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, two things that I either forgot or I didn't ever know this. First of all, that only 2 of the planes had Norton bomb sights. Yeah. And, if the Germans ever came to know that, which they may have known that, if they knew to take out the lead 2 planes, I mean, the rest of the accuracy of the rest of the bomb group is out the window. I mean, it's not going to be very good. And I would wonder if they would, obviously they would probably drop their bombs anyway, even if the lead guy was taken out, if none of the rest of them had bomb sights. And I understand not having the bomb sights on the rest of them because, um, and you may get to this later, but some planes actually were captured by the Germans.
Oh yeah.
And therefore we can't have the bomb site obviously at risk of being captured. Second thing was I did not know that they all got stick time while they were in those planes. That's interesting.
It is, and I'm not sure how common that was. You're going to hear this theme.
It makes a lot of sense.
It does, and you're going to hear this theme on subsequent clips. The theme with Frank DeCicco is he loved to fly and he wanted to fly. And any chance he had to fly, he would fly. And what I didn't remember until I pulled these clips up again is he was already a pilot. In 1939, the bug had already bit him in terms of being able to fly that Waco aircraft and all that. And those sort of things that we've talked about in previous episodes, these pilots pre-war that would fly into towns or cities or whatnot, they were heroes. They were seen as like astronauts of the day, so to speak.
Oh yeah.
And so you could see why he'd be drawn to that. Some other things I wasn't aware of is I didn't realize it dropped a waist gunner. I knew that.
I didn't know that either.
I knew that they removed the ball turret at some point in 44. But I didn't realize they dropped a waist gunner. But it makes sense. You're often, because of how you're in these formations, you're often not being attacked on two sides at once. So you ought to be able to move to whichever side of the plane you need to defend, depending on where you are in the formation. And about the Norden bomb site in the lead flight, when we were doing the interviews with like John Lucky Luckadoo, God rest his soul, and the Masters of the Air with Donald Miller, that came from, if I remember correctly, when Curtis LeMay took over the 8th Air Force, he did some math and he realized, look, we're not using the Norden bomb site to drop a bomb in a pickle barrel at 20,000 feet. It's not happening. We'd be happy if we can just hit a huge rail yard in a large city, most of the time. And so he started to put together different strategies for bombing. And the other thing he realized is because there was no lead bomber, a lot of times the bomber that would be in the lead was not the best performing bomber in the group. So it was his idea to say, let's identify these shit hot teams, let's put them out in front and have everyone follow. And he was a part of one of those teams, which I thought was really interesting.
All right.
Yeah. So there was one other thing I wanted to talk about. And I can't remember what it was. Maybe it'll pop up later. He mentions being a Toggelier.
Mm-hmm.
And Gerald Gentis, I believe, was a Toggelier. And Ryan, for our audience, may not remember, what would the Toggelier have done?
All right. So Toggelier, I know with Gerald Gentis, he was a tail gunner and Toggelier.
Yep.
And now the Toggelier, though, was he the guy that actually armed the bombs?
Yeah, they would do the pins. Yep. And
yeah. And I don't know where. Go ahead.
Okay, don't worry.
I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss.
So for our audience who didn't remember or haven't listened to Gerald Gentis, basically the Toggelier was nothing more where you had a plane that did not have a bombardier, and your job was when a light went off, your job was to make sure that the bombs were armed, and then just press the button, the toggle, and just let them fly. And it was just another one of these things that LeMay did to automate and optimize our bombing effort in World War II. And that's another thing I remember. The other thing, when you asked him if he was a waist gunner, he didn't say yes. He said, well, I did all kinds of things on the plane. I was checked out in the tail gun. I was a Toggelier. So here's a little foreshadowing. What we're learning about Frank is he was in a part of New York and he was exceptional enough to be considered for West Point. He had already was a pilot. And he did not want to pigeonhole himself as a waist gunner. There'd be nothing wrong with that, by the way.
Yeah.
This guy was destined for greater things. He's a team player. He enjoyed boot camp. He got along with people. This dude was an exceptional individual, and it's going to play out when we tell you later on in the interview what he ended up doing after the war. And let's just say he'd be immensely successful, as people probably gathered, because the dude lived on an airstrip. So, so with that being said, the next clip or two, we'll see if we play him back to back or not. I got to remember how they end. He's going to start talking about going to England and what it was like over there.
Well, we went through phase training in Rapid City. When we left Lincoln, we went to Rapid. That was combat training. When we completed that, which was maybe 6 to 8 weeks, I can't remember the exact time, but I do know that that was just about the time that they were getting ready to make the invasion in Normandy, and they were pushing us through pretty fast. So we went through our phase training and then went to Kearney, Nebraska, and picked up a brand new B-17. It was right out of the factory. And when the weather finally cleared up so we could start our cross country, we went from Kearney to Bangor, Maine, Gander Field. And we spent a few days there again waiting for weather to straighten up. And then finally we made the hop from Gander to, I can't remember the name of the airport, but we went to Newfoundland. We were there 9 days before we could finally get airborne. And we went out one evening just before dark and flew 13 hours. And the next morning we're looking for a place to put that thing down because we were starting to get low on fuel. We had what we call Tokyo tanks that were 500 gallons each, and there was one in each bomb bay to give us 13 or more hours to keep that plane in the air. We finally spotted land. We called in. We broke silence because we were getting pretty low on gas. And we asked them to direct us, and they did. They responded and had us go to Nuts Corner, Ireland. Okay. I thought we were going to England and we wound up in Ireland. Well, close. Well, we wound up at Molesworth, which was the 303rd Bomb Group, better known as Hell's Angels, which was a name that was picked from an airplane, B-17, that came over from the States and was named Hell's Angels. And we picked that name up as our group name. And as I say, that was in Molesworth, which was between Northampton and Bedford area, about 60 miles slightly northwest of London. We arrived there. We arrived at Molesworth right around the 1st of August, 44. Okay, and things were pretty hot and heavy over on the continent. And of course, as soon as we got into Molesworth, we immediately started practice flying and then began flying combat. And we were told we would fly 25 missions, and then we would be released. And of course, my whole crew was behind me because they knew how badly I wanted to get into pilot training. I was willing to fly the combat tour just to get that appointment to the pilot training program. But anyway, the 25 missions that we were supposed to fly, all of a sudden in December of that year, became 35. When the Battle of the Bulge, we had to do another 10. But what happened is that after we flew 5 missions additional, or a total of 30, the Germans had been pretty well whipped all over the continent. And they came back and said that if we had at least 30, we'd go home.
So his sense of urgency was to complete his missions, and his entire crew knew this. If he survived them, because, the 8th Air Force took some of the highest casualty rates of any theater in the war. So this is a pretty ambitious plan. Finish my missions, go stateside so I can become a pilot, because he earned it through combat, which is, talk about moxie. You know, a
I
lot of
mean,
people were just trying to complete their missions and go home.
right. That's a tough slog. That's a tough path to go.
Yeah.
And I mean, that tells you how much he dearly wanted to be a pilot, and he wanted to fly. So it's amazing. You're right. A lot of moxie there.
Totally. And then just a quick timeline. August of 44 is when he lands in Molesworth, and he would be part of the 303rd Bomb Group. And in August of 44 is after D-Day, of course, in June of 1944. But all of the D-Day activities, pushing, into France, trying to do the breakout the hedgerows. That's what was going on in Europe, and the 8th Air Force was playing more of a role as still at this time as a tactical air force, bombing enemy troop formations to clear the way for our troops. They wouldn't go back to strategic targets like, railway bridges and airports and things like that, and oil farms until a little bit later. But what was the 303rd Bomb Group? What kind of outfit was that, Rhino?
So the 303rd, they actually came to Molesworth in 1942. That was when they were actually established over there in England. Their first combat mission was November the 17th, and it was against it was Saint Nazaire, France, which. If for anybody who knows, there was a pretty interesting commando operation that happened at Saint Nazaire where a bunch of British commandos loaded up a ship full of explosives and rammed a gate there at the mouth of one of the harbors to essentially leave it as a ticking time bomb. And as a battle ensued before the ship went up, the guys were actually captured. The British guys were captured. They were being interrogated, and then the ship actually exploded while they were being interrogated, rendering that port out of use for the rest of the war.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, little sidebar there, but that's what Saint Nazaire.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because it was one of the most amazing commando operations in the entire war, where you bring in ships full of explosives, blow it up in the harbor, have it block the harbor. These guys were fighting for their lives, shooting guns from these ships at shore installations. This is on occupied German territory.
Right.
And then some of them lived to tell the tale. What I heard about that raid is the Germans were absolutely so blown away by the bravery of those British commandos.
No pun intended.
Some of them were literally blown away, but the ones who lived from the explosion, that the Germans really regarded that mission as like, wow, we tip our cap to you. It sucks that you did that, and a bunch of our guys died, and we killed a bunch of yours, but good job on you, mate.
Well, what's amazing, though, is how quickly their tone changed, the Germans, because prior to the ship exploding, they're interrogating these British guys. They're like, what the heck are you guys thinking?
Yeah,
all you did
roll
was,
on in here.
We're gonna have this ship moved out of the way tomorrow. It'll be back open. This is pathetic.
Kablam!
Kaboom! Oh,
now we get it. So anyway, it's a really interesting little side note. But so that was their first mission, was to bomb. I think they had submarine pens and things there. If I remember correctly.
That's right. So then, though, I mean, this was one of the first bomb groups who undertook daylight bombing.
Yeah.
And it had very heavy casualties. As anyone knows, it started in 1943 when we switched over to the British taking the nighttime raids, and we took the daytime raids. And because of that, we took it on the chin. I mean, we got some very heavy casualties from this. The first U.S. heavy bomber strike on Germany was against Wilhelmshaven, which was in 1943. It was one of these daylight raids. The Hells Angels plane that became the name of the unit was the first plane out of its whole group to reach 25 missions.
Yes. And in fact, when we were talking to John Lucky Luckadoo, he corrected me because everyone's heard of the Memphis Belle. And finishing 25 missions and coming stateside and having the tours and the movies made about it. And it's kind of sad that our casualty rates were so high that when you finished 25 missions, you had to celebrate, make a movie, and write books about it. He corrected us. He's like, the Memphis Belle was not the first B-17 crew to finish 25 missions. It was the Hells Angels. The plane was named Hells Angels. And do you remember what John said, what happened to that plane?
No.
So what happened on that plane, and the reason you don't hear about the Hells Angel, like War Bonds tour, is because some attention-seeking general said, you know what, I'm going to fly back to the United States with you guys. I want to introduce you to America. Instead of letting them have the glory, he decided to be a glory hound. And as they were flying over some mountain range, I forgot where it was, this colonel or general, I can't remember which one it was a high-ranking officer, wanted to take the stick and fly and flew into the mountain and killed everyone on that plane.
I did not know that. I forgot all about that.
And the
My
reason you don't
goodness.
know is because it's a huge black eye for the U.S. Army Air Force. And
Wow.
it's in John Luckadoo's book, Damn Lucky. I think it's in Masters of the Air. When I read that, I was pissed. That's not leadership. That's not what leadership does. You know, get in a plane to go glory hound with these guys, and then you end up killing them because you're a half-assed pilot and a one-star general. And then that's why you don't hear about the Hells Angels. You hear about the Memphis
The
Belle.
Memphis Belle. Really. No kidding. Interesting. Another very famous plane from the 303rd was called Knockout Dropper.
Oh.
And that plane actually became a record-setting plane in that it also reached 25 missions, but the plane itself went on to achieve 75 missions before it was put out of commission.
Holy crap.
So that's why it's a record-setting plane in that it survived for 75 missions starting in 1943. So it was in the middle of the heaviest of the fighting in the air during the war. During 1944, it was a big combat year for the 303rd. This is when Frank actually came into being in the group. They had some distinguished action at Oschersleben and flew 3 D-Day missions. And they supported the Normandy breakout and later ground operations. And what we can do is, I'll just mention there's a couple of little bullet points here for 1945. They supported the final drive into Germany. Their last mission was April the 25th to Pilsen, and they finished the war with 364 missions. I think I saw somewhere, I'll have to find it, but there were somewhere around 10,000 sorties that they flew. Something crazy.
I think it had, if not the highest, one of the highest number of sorties flown because of how early it was in the war. So Frank didn't join one of these newly constituted bomb groups that rolled in 44. He was with one of the handful of OGs. The Bloody Hundredth was one of those.
Right.
That's the one featured in Masters of the Air because of their quote unquote bad luck. So he would have been around some pretty amazing people at this point in the war. They had the fighter escort worked out. They had obviously the lead bomber things worked out. Our Air Force could be better protected. Men were still dying. From the research I did really quick, I think their casualty rate was 48%. So almost half of the men who served in this bomb group ended up being casualties, or they died, or POWs, which is, so it was dangerous business. But basically, by the time Frank joined this really storied bomb group with an amazing tradition of trial and error and finally success, it was in a part of the war where we were clicking. We were really getting shit done.
Mm-hmm. So I got an exact number: 10,721 sorties.
Woo.
And they dropped roughly 25,000 tons of bombs. And they lost 165 aircraft in combat.
There you go. There you go. My gosh. Well, okay. So now the clips are going to switch more into the living conditions on the base, getting oriented with the plane that he was going to fly a bit more. So now we're going to get into some more of the boots on the ground stuff. Well, now we know where Frank's going. Molesworth, we know who he's serving with, the 303rd Bomb Group. Join us next week as he tells us about his exploits in the air as a member of the 8th Air Force fighting over the European theater of operations. Till then. Hey, welcome back, Warrior Next Door listeners, for the second installment of the Frank DeCicco series. In this episode 2, you're going to hear Frank talk a lot more about what it was like to be on those B-17s in the air war over Europe. So check it out.
Describe your living conditions at the base.
Mud. Lots of it. Particularly that winter. It was cold. Day like today was a beautiful day over there. It was terrible. And those poor linemen, they used to make me really feel for them. They would be working in all kinds of weather and would be living in pup tanks out on the line. I mean, you know, some of those guys had been there 3 years doing that work. So we treated our ground crew quite well because we felt that they were doing a tremendous job keeping those airplanes in the air. And they were so ready to help. I mean, anything that we wanted that they could do, they do it. I remember one time I told the sergeant, I can't remember his name, I think his name was Harden, Sergeant Harden, who was our ground crew chief, that I needed a couple of handles put so I could hang on to. And he did put them in. So anyway, it was that sort of thing. But it was not the best condition. But when we looked at what the other people had, the ground crews, and even when we were flying over the continent, and you're looking down there, and all you're going to see is snow and just horrible weather. And I knew those GIs were down there up to their elbows and whatever.
It's interesting when we asked people in our experience with people who served in the European theater and 8th Air Force what the living conditions were like, and they all talk about being cold and rainy. The weather was terrible. Historically, for reasons I don't fully understand, I'm not a climatologist, but the weather in 43, 44 in Europe generally was like historically bad. It wasn't just we weren't used to European weather. It was bad by European standards.
Yeah.
The Battle of the Bulge is a testament to that. And the other thing that we've heard a lot of the people that we've interviewed who flew in these bombers is when they'll start talking about, oh, the food was this, and we only had one coal heater, and the bed sucked, and all, and a lot of them will say, but you know what? It's still a hell of a lot better than being a GI. And Alan Sr., our very first interview we ever did, who flew on B-24s, and he was a waist gunner as well. He talked about being able to see the battlefield on some of their missions, seeing the foxholes, seeing burned out tanks and buildings. And that would have been a stark reminder that no matter how bad it was on the continent, it was a lot worse with the troops they were supporting. And it's cool that these airmen recognize that.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. Whenever you're in a plane flying at 20, 25,000 feet, and it's minus 40 in the plane, and it's freezing and everything. At least if you get back to your base, you got a warm bunk that night, and you got a warm meal, and you got a cup of coffee ready for you, and no one's shooting at you. You know, whereas if you're on the ground out there, you're sleeping in a foxhole. I mean, you've all seen. I always bring up Band of Brothers because it's the most visceral series you could watch that really conveys the GI's plight during the war and just how brutal that winter was.
Totally. And so I tip my cap to Frank DeCicco for all the stuff that he did, and also recognizing that, he was supporting those troops and those guys had a pretty sorry existence. And now this next clip is kind of fun because it's a question that you asked later and got a different answer, but go ahead and check this one out.
Can you describe for me the sounds, the smells, and the feeling of flying in a B-17?
Yeah, there was a smell, a peculiar smell in a B-17, and it always reminded me as though somebody had been in it and threw up in it. That's what it smelled like, and
it probably had.
It made me a little sick to my stomach until I got used to it. Now I'd be all right, but it always, and it seemed to be in every one of them, and I think it was a metallic, sickening smell that maybe something to do with the paint that they coated those that metal skin with on the inside, because it was kind of a green color, about the color of your shirt. And I imagine, well, of course there was all kinds of oil and grease and what's the stuff that you smell when the bullets are fired?
Cordite.
Yeah, cordite. That was the word, yes. There seemed to be a smell of that kind in there, too. But, of course, after we got 10,000 feet or so in the air, we had our masks on. And we would stay on oxygen for 3-4 hours. We used to smoke in those days. And we used to try to light a cigarette up at 20,000. That's a tough job because there's not enough oxygen. So we put the cigarette in our mouth, and get the thing lit. I mean, get the lighter lit, and then take a draw on the cigarette. And the only thing that would burn was the paper. And the tobacco would be sticking out about that far.
You heard it here first. So do you remember when I forgot who we were interviewing, maybe it was John Luckadoo, and they picked up a brand new bomber. I think it was out of like Kansas City. Do you remember what he said it smelled like then?
Yeah, a new car.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I was trying to think of that. I thought there was someone we interviewed. I thought it was someone before Luckadoo, but I thought it was Frank that said that. But no, this is not what Frank remembered at all.
Frank said it smelled like vomit. And I'm like, and he's trying to explain it away. Well, maybe it's the metal and stuff. And you just made a comment during with the clip. It's like, no, maybe someone threw up in the plane. And why would they have had?
Well, especially if it's a used plane.
Yes.
And, you know, I mean, of course, people probably threw up all over in it. There is definitely probably still the cordite that's still all over the walls in there, you know. I mean, it's crazy, but, you know, I can't imagine. And this is the other thing, you know, what Apollo mission was it or not the Apollo mission, what mission was it where the astronauts died on the launching pad? Gus Grissom.
I think it was Apollo 1. I think it was the first one, the very first one. Roger B. Chaffee and others died in it.
One of the reasons why that fire spread so fast inside the capsule was because of the pure oxygen environment in there.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, you got your oxygen. Now, I don't know how flammable it would have made things, but if you're lighting your lighter underneath your oxygen mask and stuff, I don't understand how that could be a good thing. And surprised people didn't die from that. You know,
they may have. So for our audience, we just had a chance to interview the curator of what I would say, I don't think it's controversial, is the largest, most comprehensive World War II museum in the United States, the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Yeah. His name is Corey Graff, and he talks about the oral histories that they collect to help with their various exhibits and the books that he's written. And he mentioned, and I was going to say something during the interview we had with him just 4 or 5 days ago, but I was like, nah, this isn't about us. It's about him. He was talking about what's it like smoking, trying to light a cigarette at 20,000 feet. And I was going to say, I can tell you because I just listened to clips from Frank DeCicco.
Firsthand information.
Totally. So what I thought Frank was going to say was, a lot of guys had their face blown off trying to, use the oxygen from the mask to light a cigarette. But at 20,000 feet, apparently they had their masks off, which some men couldn't do. We've interviewed people that talked about some men could handle the oxygen deprivation better than others. Some people need their mask on, some didn't. And apparently, I think we all know how addictive cigarette smoking is, because if you're willing to say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and light one of these up at 20,000 feet, and all you get is the burnt paper. I didn't know that would happen, that the tobacco wouldn't even burn, just the paper would.
Well, and can you blame the guys? They just came out of a hugely stressful life or death situation.
Yes.
They're still trying to survive in a freezing environment. And these guys needed a cigarette to calm their nerves. Totally. I can totally get it.
So do I. But I never knew what the result would be until I heard this. And now it's like, okay, that's what it's like at 20,000 feet. Now we know.
My gosh.
Oh,
all right. Well,
okay.
All right. Well, let's move on.
Yep.
And now we're going to learn the name of the plane that Frank flew on.
Yep.
Is that right?
The name of the plane, and we're going to touch on some of the camaraderie that develops with these crews who fought in these planes together.
All right.
What was the name of your plane?
Fiddle Peak.
How did you come across that name? How did you come with that name?
Jim O'Leary. Oh, boy. I should have really brought you upstairs because Jim just wrote to me here the other day. I got to tell you guys something.
Here we go.
Jim is 85 plus.
He was a pilot.
He was about 7 years older than I was. And he was the first pilot on the crew. And, we were very good friends. In fact, he was in business here with me in the real estate business for about 5 years. Then he retired when he turned 65 and went back to Montana. And unfortunately, he just lost his wife a short time ago. But he called me one Sunday, and I was out in my gym, which is that room in the back. And got on the phone, it was him. And before he hung up that morning, he said, Frank, I said, yeah, Jim. He said, I love you. Boy, talking about having a bad feeling, that was a bad feeling. And I said, Jim, I said, Jim, I'm glad you said that. And I said, the same goes here. I said, I love you too. But that was the kind of cohesiveness that we had when we were, particularly when we were flying. I mean, everybody was relying on the other guy to stay alive if it was possible, and get back on the ground in one piece.
In my 20s and 30s, I don't think that clip would have been as impactful for me as it is now in my 50s. Mm-hmm. As you get older and you have people in your lives that you spent a lot of time with, it's not embarrassing or unmanly to recognize that you start to love those men, that you did love those men that you served with. And I thought that was a really touching clip, and it reinforces what I think many of our audience already knows from other interviews of veterans that we featured who talked about the connection that they had with the men they fought alongside with.
So when he said that gave him, he said it gave him a bad feeling, right?
Yeah.
Is that because he realized that they were getting older, life's short, they're near the ends of their lives, and it's no time better than now to let someone know how you always have felt about them and how much you value them? That is a touching moment there.
That's exactly how I interpret it, Ryan. And again, in my 20s and 30s, I'd have been like, huh? But now that I'm, older, it's like, it's like I that resonates with me. And he said the name of the bomber very quickly. And quite frankly, I didn't exactly understand it. In a later clip, he's going to explain it more, and I'll let him explain what it means. But the name of the plane was Fit O Peak. And I'm going to let him tell you in a later clip what exactly that means and why they named it that. But I just thought that was a really powerful clip. It was another thing that he said that I didn't really recall. I don't remember being impactful to me when we recorded it. And then when I was going through this, I was like, man, that is beautiful. Mm-hmm. Thank God for people like that. So,
and just to wax a bit more on this, you think back on special friends you've had in your lives. You think back on, the guy that you almost died in a car wreck with because you drank too much. Or, the fight you got into and your buddies, jumped in with you and stuff like that. I mean, or great trips you've been on or great experiences that you've had with your buddies and stuff. Can you imagine the depth of what that would feel like? Because I've never been in the military. I think only veterans, only guys who've been through action like this, really feel the most camaraderie you can feel, which would be having gone through death together.
I agree.
And I can only imagine the intensity and the emotions that must wash over guys like that when they look back on their lives as they approach the end, and they realize, you know what? I mean, this guy I talk to every day, and I have talked to every day or every week for the last 50 years, means more to me than almost my children do. Yes. And I think that's the way a lot of these guys felt. So anyway, it's something that, I don't think you and I can really appreciate. No, fortunately and unfortunately.
I think you're right. And in fact, what we're going to do now is go into clips where he's going to talk more about some of the things that have occurred to the men that he flew with. He immediately changed the topic from meeting with O'Leary, who was his pilot. And he's like, you know what? I got some more things to tell you about the men I served with. And this has to do with the radio operator on the plane.
One man, our radio operator, Bernard Delaney, was hit on our 22nd mission. And I was in the waist that day of the airplane when it happened. And Jim called me and said, Frank, you better go up and see what you can do for Red, because Red was hollering that he was hit, because I didn't have any idea where he was hit. And there was a doorway with a door that closes the radio room off. And of course, it was less drafty and less cold if he kept that door closed. And so the door was closed. Another reason the door was closed is because there was a chute where he would feed chaff into it. You know what chaff is? chaff is looks like the stuff they used to hang on Christmas trees, the tin foil strips. Well, it was bundled, and we used to throw these bundles of chaff out into the slipstream, and the slipstream would break the wrapping, and then the tin foil would start falling to the ground, and it would really screw up the German radar, because the Germans did have radar when we were over there. We didn't have a whole lot of it, but they had plenty. And it would do a job on it. They just threw their guns off terribly. I don't know how we ever got onto that, but I think that the English taught us that one. But anyway, I went up to the radio room and I pushed the door and it didn't want to move. I gave it a hell of a push. And the reason it didn't want to move is because he's laying on the floor with his feet up against the back of that door, and he's got a piece of bone out of his leg right here. When he turned his seat around so it was backwards, and here's the chute that he threw the chaff out, and he had his leg like this. And when that came through, it came through from the bottom of the airplane and went right into his leg. And of course, when he went backwards, he rolled over into the aisle, kind of, and I'm trying to bang that door open against his bad leg.
Oh.
He was going to kill me. He wanted to. Anyway, but I shouldn't be talking like this, because what happened was that I immediately reached up on the wall and pulled down the first aid kit, and I pulled out a little tube of what do they call it? Morphine. And I said to him, Red, I said, I'm sorry, but I said, I've got to get some morphine into you to kill that pain in your leg. So he shut his eyes, and man, I jabbed him in the leg. Mm-hmm. I squeezed, nothing happened. So didn't even get a drop out. So I said, well, that was still good. So take another one and do the same thing. Wouldn't come out. That was no good. Then I remembered that in training they said at 30,000 feet, it's 60 below zero, and morphine is like a rock.
Yep.
What we were supposed to do was to take and put the morphine tube in our hand and close it, because the heated glove that if it was working, we would melt the morphine sufficiently so that you could get it. But what happened was, I think I got a little bit from each tube into him. And finally, the last one, man, I just made sure it went in. And then I started trying to help him with the leg, and I wanted to get it bandaged. And he had the big flying boot on. And, to pull him off is you got to give him a hell of a yank. And there was no way I could get that boot off his foot. So I don't know what to do. What do you think I did? I got two splints, and I put one on each side of his leg, and then just took the gauze and wrapped it up. Yep. It was terrible. We got back to base, and we took him out through the bomb bay, because we couldn't get him around the attachment of the ball turret was fastened to the upper part of the airplane. It had a column light, and he couldn't get him past there, so we went out through the bomb bay, and he was acting like a drunk, and he had his arms out like this, and he said, "Don't drop me, guys! Don't drop me! Come on, don't drop me!" He was on a stretcher. But while he was laying on the floor, and this guy was a pretty conservative guy. I can't remember whether he smoked or not, but I know he wasn't much of a sweets eater or anything. But we had a bunch of candy bars on the airplane, so I collected all the candy bars, Babe Ruths and everything, and I said, "Come on, eat them." To keep him busy. And he would put that Babe Ruth in his mouth, and he'd go,
it's frozen.
He couldn't break it. And he was so comical, because he was intoxicated with the morphine. And it was a show that he put on for me all the way back. 4 hours I took care of him. Unfortunately, that poor guy died of a heart attack in 1975, June of 75.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, so another member of his crew who's close to these sort of things were going on in the air war over Europe every day. And we you were just talking about how you and I have buddies and we've done things together, whether it was alcohol related or not. I mean, these are the sort of things that, I mean, talk about connecting with somebody when you got to go up in the front of the plane and try to save this guy's life, and try to give him comfort, try to keep him busy. Remember, these missions were 8 hours plus long.
Oh yeah.
It's not like he got injured and they wrapped him up and landed really quick, right? I mean, he spent hours up there trying to make sure that this friend of his didn't die.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And you worry about them bleeding out.
Yes.
Obviously, and especially in that very frigid environment, they could go into shock. They could freeze to death very, very easily. So it was a very, really touchy situation for those guys.
And it continued to get touchy because the next one he talks about some of the fighters and other things that could cause injuries and kill people.
We went to all the named targets. Some of them we went a number of times. Ludwigshafen and Mannheim, which are across the Rhine River from one another. We kept trying to knock that bridge up. We knocked it down today. They put it up tomorrow. We were back in with no load. So it looked like they didn't know any other way but that. But we went to Bremen. And
Did you fly unescorted during the war?
unescorted? Oh yeah, there were never enough fighters around to cover the entire bomber stream from the bases as they took off all the way to the target. There would be just hundreds of airplanes on that in that bomber stream. So that the fighters would either be above us or off to one side. But there was always more bombers than there were fighters. Of course, we did our share of the fighting too. The 13 50 caliber machine guns on the Model G B-17. And of course, you had to be careful you didn't get shot with the gunner from the plane alongside of you.
Yep.
Did you have any enemy kills to your credit?
No.
No.
We had one guy on the crew, Joe Zawanka, who isn't living any longer. But Joe had 2.5 kills, I believe he got credit for. Of course, it was a hard thing to try to determine who fired that fatal bullet that caused that plane to go down. And then a lot of times they would be hit bad, but they dive away, and that's the end. You never knew whether they went down or not. It was a guess of my God.
Yeah, so the two forms of danger he describes is enemy fighters and the bombers next to him shooting at their plane. And that happened a lot.
I was just going to say, we've talked about this, I think, in years past or in interviews past, where I don't know how many of these guys probably have gotten hit by their own bombers in their formation. I mean, the B-17 had guns pointed in every possible direction from that plane, from the very top to they had cheek turrets. They had, a chin turret that shot 50 cals. They had the guys on the sides of the plane. They had the 50 cals in the back.
Yep.
I just can't imagine what the true numbers are for injuries related to friendly fire.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And we won't know, but we can know is I just did a little research, and the number of claimed planes that were shot down by the 303rd, and it's probably a conservative estimate because of what Frank said, not knowing if some of the planes that you shot that were damaged in smoke crashed or not, is 664 planes. So having that defensive ordnance, it's close in, right? It's last resort. The fighters were the things that were supposed to really keep the enemy fighters off you. They were effective. You're gonna ask a question about friendly fire later. So audience, just remember that. Here's one form, getting shot at by your own bomber, and later Ryan is going to get Frank to talk about another one, but we'll get to that. Ron, I want you to play these next two, 13 and 3, back to back. It talks about the first one. He's going to give a really beautiful description of the bomb run and then flak. And then on the second one, he's going to talk more about the effect of flak on the airplane.
Describe your duties during a mission.
mainly keep our eyes open and watch for enemy aircraft. There wasn't a whole lot we could do about the flak. It was going to come up there and do its damage if it could. But fighting the enemy aircraft was, to me, a lot less difficult than fighting flak. There wasn't much you could do with the flak. If you were on a bomb run, once you get to what we call the IP, which was the initial point at which we would start our bomb run, and then we had to fly out at a very specific altitude, a certain heading, and certain speed. You also the airplane was being flown by the bombardier through the bomb site, if he had one. But the bomb site would be, sending a signal to the AFC, which is automatic flight control device that we used, which was an autopilot type of piece of equipment. And but the very moment that the radio man, who was holding his door open, looking in the bomb bay, when those bombs were going, boy, he'd say, "Bombs away!" As fast as we could get out of there, we would. It was a very heavy evasive action, getting out of the direct fire. Never thought about the danger. I was just as afraid as the next guy when we were in combat and under fire. And we were either having a fighter on our tail or we were getting, knocked lopsided with flak. Flak was terrible. I mean, anybody says he wasn't scared when he was in a flak barrage or a box barrage, as we used to call it. They fired right over the target that we were trying to hit. So we had to fly through those box barrages, and it was just one shell after another fired to the same spot. They were all accurate, but there were so many of us up there that it wasn't so hard to hit us. Since we're on that subject, I'd like to tell you that on one raid, we put up 3,000 heavy bombers and 2,000 fighter escort, and we all went to the same target.
Oh.
And that was the Battle of the Bulge in December of 44.
I wonder if that was St. Vith, because St. Vith just got hammered during the Battle of the Bulge. And we were there with Burton, just a couple of years ago, and we were right on the outskirts of St. Vith. And we went into a timber and saw one of those very huge craters from the bombing efforts there.
Totally. And the other thing is, at this point in our lives, 2003, when this is the second interview we conducted, you got to remember, Ryan, the whole reason that we wanted to record these veterans is because we had people in our lives who served in the military. Like you had people on your side of the family who died in the military, who were killed in the military, and I had people who served in the Navy and all that. And we just thought, we need to record this stuff. We just need to go up to veterans and make sure that we could share these stories so people can understand what they went through and appreciate it more. And when I heard him talk about these things, this was all new to me. It's not like I had sat down with 20 or 30 people who flew B-17s and kind of got used to hearing a narrative about what it was like in the European Air War. I didn't have that narrative yet. It was an open book. It was being written by people like him in my mind. And I'm like, I'm sitting across somebody who had to save someone's life, his radio man, who expressed this deep affection for the people he served with, and how he's talking about how terrified he was. And then I had to keep reminding myself, he volunteered to do this so he could go be a pilot.
Yeah.
I mean, his whole plan was, I'll do these 25, 30, 35 missions and then go stateside and do that. And I never asked him this question. I never asked him if during the course of these missions that he flew, did he ever second guess his decision and think, maybe I'll just get my pilot license after the war? It wasn't worth it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously at that point, there's no turning back. And he wasn't a guy, with the West Point, pedigree and that sort of thing. He wasn't a guy that was going to just, say, all right, I'm out of here. I'm
Yep.
done. You know, he was in it for better or worse. He's going to see it through, I'm sure. And
Well,
that's the kind of guy he was, you know.
amen, bro. And go ahead and play the next clip because he's going to talk about some of the damage that the plane took, which just kind of reinforces this. Whoa, really, dude?
What sort of damage did your plane sustain?
Well, most often it would pick up a few holes. Sometimes it would get beat up pretty good. I think one of the scariest things that happened was a B-17 flying up in front of us got a direct hit and exploded. And we flew into the debris, and it looked like a piece of the landing gear was dropping and hit right in our number 3 engine. And we had to really quickly feather that prop, or Jim did. And then I remember that all of a sudden my right waist window was blocked. You couldn't see out of it because it got covered with oil that came out of that engine. So that shook us up pretty good, but the airplane was still flying, and we flew it home.
During Masters of the Air, one of the things that it did well, and of course it did well because it was a Spielberg, Tom Hanks production, was show the absolute violence that occurred on these missions that the 8th Air Force flew. With, he just described planes literally blowing up and having pieces flying all over. And many times those pieces would knock down the planes flying next to them.
Absolutely.
And I'll never forget this. I went to the Band of Brothers, not the Band of Brothers, the Masters of the Air. They had a website, they had a forum, they had a Reddit feed. There were people who were saying, come on, was it really that bad? How much are they sensationalizing? Because there's literally a scene in Masters of the Air where a bomber blows up in front of them and it almost takes down the bomber they're flying. And there were people who were like, oh, they're just sensationalizing it. They're trying to make this like the Avengers. This is why we do what we do, is so people like us can provide firsthand personal accounts that authors and museums can use to let the public know that these sort of things actually happen. And in fact, I would argue that the video footage that they were able to create in Masters of the Air probably wasn't scary enough. There's probably no way
for sure
to replicate what he experienced. Think what he just had. A bomber blew up above him. The pieces crashed through their plane and knocked out one of their engines.
Was it Alan Sr. or was it Gerald Gentis that talked about the bomb rack that fell from above and went into their plane?
Gentis,
yeah. I mean, this is stuff that's like, you know, it's almost comical, but you realize it's not funny,
right?
You know, I mean, I know fighter pilots would do the same thing. They'd be hot on the tail of an ME-109 or a Japanese plane or something, and they'd take it out. And they had to be damn careful that they didn't fly through that debris cloud because it would take them out also, obviously, you know. So it was there's a lot of lead flying around, man.
There is. And this idea, this is the idea I had. My Hollywood version of how a plane got shot down was flak burst or fighter bullets would hit the aircraft engine. The engine would sputter, and then they would fall out of formation, and everyone would bail out in an orderly way, and then the plane would crash. No, most of the time, what would happen is when these planes got hit, big chunks got blown off, or if they had bomb loads, it would blow up entirely, and there was nothing left to bail out of. There's no humans left to do that.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, remember my very sage question I asked Harold Dunn? Harold Dunn, if you
wouldn't remind our audience.
Well, you got to kind of laugh at yourself sometimes with this stuff. And you got to realize that this is where it's obvious Tony and I are not professionals at this sort of stuff. But Harold Dunn, who is a B-17 pilot, he was shot down, became a POW in the Great Escape Camp, Stalag Luft 3. Well, in my very hard-hitting, deep interview, you know, he's talking about, you know, just deciding, you know, he needed to bail out of his damn plane. It's on fire.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what point did you decide that you needed to bail out of the plane, Mr. Dodd? He said, when the damn plane was on fire. Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, that feels like a leading indicator for chaos. I think that probably... Yeah, we approve of your decision. So
that's right. Okay.
Okay. So now on the next clip, there's still 2 or 3 things he's going to talk about. They're like, holy crap. I think this is the most tragic thing that I heard him say during the entire interview is this experience that you're about to hear. And that's not an exaggeration. Warrior Next Door listeners, please join us next week for the third installment of the Frank DeCicco series, where he speaks to this very disturbing event and several others as well. Please join us. Until then. Hey, you come back to us. Welcome back, Warrior Next Door listeners. Welcome to the third installment of the Frank DeCicco series, Someone from Deep in Our Archives. And in this episode, he's going to talk more about some of the more disturbing things that happened on those B-17 bombers while they were fighting the air war over Europe.
Well, I think the worst thing, of course, was we had a very good friend by the name of Harold Katz, who was a navigator on one of the crews that went through Rapid City phase training with us, and there were 55 crews that picked up the new B-17s and flew them over. There was probably another 10 crews that got sent over on a boat. And they were usually the guys that screwed up. They get their plane taken away from them, they put them on a boat. See, they cut up too much, drinking and carousing. They would get themselves in trouble. We were going to fly our 29th mission the next day. And that evening, Harold came in to our barracks, and we were sitting on the floor, I remember, playing cards, monkeying around. And he said, "Hey guys, how about flying with you tomorrow?" He said, "It'll be my last mission." He said, "My crew got one mission ahead of him. Therefore, he was having to fly this last mission with someone else. And he chose to fly with us because he knew us. And I believe he was a lead pilot. Yeah, he must have been to fly with us. And I think we were on the bomb run. And we had a very young-looking bombardier with us that day that I didn't know and never did get to know him. I don't believe I ever heard his name. Probably did. But he was, up over the bomb site, kind of leaning forward like this, and Harold was standing up behind him and kind of guiding him into where the target was, saying, "Move a little right, a little left." And just about that time, I don't believe it was a direct hit, but there was an explosion in front of us. And of course, the anti-aircraft bomb was like a grenade. It broke off in little pieces. Well, not little pieces. Some of them were pretty good sized chunks. And that piece that hit Harold came right through the plexiglass nose and hit Harold right in the face here someplace. It blew the whole side of his head out. And that was his last mission.
Wow. And this was a good friend of his. That's like, "I'm going to fly my last mission. I want to do it with your crew." Ryan and I, we have learned that a lot of times the crew didn't fly every mission together. Sometimes they would get sick. Sometimes they would get seconded to a different plane, and sometimes they didn't finish their last mission together. So it was his last mission, a very good friend of his. And, to have to witness and have in your mind's eye, one of his good friends having literally his head blown off in the front of the plane.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine.
Literally can't imagine that.
So, obviously the odds of dying on any mission are high. I would like to know how many people died on their last mission, on their last one that they had to do. I wonder what that percentage is. Like, was it, only 2% had that happen to them? Or was it was more like around 15% of people? Just is through statistics. It's pure. I mean, like a lot of those guys would say, they never thought it would happen to them, but some guys did feel like that there was a bullet out there with their name on it. There was a flak shell out there with their name on it. But anyway, that's a sad deal. You hear about these a lot in a lot of these stories of guys on their last mission dying.
It probably because it feels more tragic when you've made it through all of that and you've got this last mission, you're about to drop bombs and you're going to turn around and land and go home. And then it's lights out. I mean, he is absolutely destroyed. And he already intimated that it was their 29th mission when this happened, they still had to fly another mission after that. And this next clip speaks to, and remember, at this point in time, the word on the street and the crew thinks that you got to fly, 35 missions to go home. And so they didn't know that their 30th, they didn't know how important this mission would be. In this clip, he talks about it.
We had another mission to fly after that. It was a tough one when we got that 30th. Of course, we didn't know that we were going to be cut off at 30. We didn't realize that until we got back.
Yep.
And we parked the airplane, and the CO came up in the Jeep with a sergeant driving him, and he jumped out of the Jeep, and we were just coming out of the airplane. He said, "How many of you guys got?" We said, "We got 30." He said, "Okay, go on home." That's all he had to say, man. I was heading for the barracks, get my clothes and get out of there.
Can you imagine?
No.
I mean, it's like a school day. It's like a snow day.
Right.
You know how it is when you're all like sitting around the radio and you hear your school, you're like, yeah.
Yes.
Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that?
No.
When you're not expecting it at all, you know?
The day before, they watched their friend die horribly. They had to fly this last mission. I wish he had a date so I could have known which mission it was. I don't have that. He doesn't say it. And then they land their 30th mission, and they're like, "You guys can go home." And the only thing he cares about at this point is to go into pilot's training. It's not even, "I survived this, I'm going to go home and live a quiet and peaceful life." It's like, "All right, I've got box checked. This is one results-oriented dude right here. All right, time to go on to the next thing." Unbelievable. So, as so often happens, we have a number of things that he shared with us that are a little bit out of sequence that we think it's really important for our audience to hear. Maybe you want to know more about what, Frank thought about some of the German pilots. Well, this next clip talks to that.
I think that German pilots were a rare sort of people. It was said that a lot of them would come up and do battle with us and get shot up. The airplane would get shot up, and they jump out, float down, get into another airplane, and come back up again.
Yep.
Now, how many times? I would imagine there are some of those fanatics that would come up 10 times if they had to. I think that most of them knew they were going to die because most of them did.
Yep.
And then they brought the 262 twin engine jet into operation, and that killed a lot of pilots. It was not ready for flight or much less combat, and it was a difficult plane to shoot down because it was so fast. One day we had one approaching us from 8 o'clock high, coming in on us, and I saw it way out, and I reported to the pilot. I said, "We got a what looks like a German jet coming in at us from 8 o'clock high," and he radioed for fighter support. I never saw P-38s in combat before. That was the one and only time. And they were either 3 or 4. I've forgotten now which it was. But I remember when this was the back of our plane. They came in like this, and they went just like that right behind us, right into him.
Wow.
Flew head on into it. But there were 3 or 4 of them. All had their guns trained on that one jet. And usually, if they were going to get one, the P-51s seemed to have the best advantage in this program because they flew in elements of 4, and they would climb up to 40,000 feet or better, just about as high as the prop would take them. And they would watch for, it was a clear day, they could see the German jets coming up out of the clouds, coming up towards us. 2 of the 4 would break off and in a dive go right straight down on him. And they would flip over and go into a cloud. And because they had such a short amount of fuel, because they could only stay in the air for a few minutes, they would come right back out again and out of the cloud, hoping that they would come up under us or find us, because they wanted us, for a German, for an American, for a German to know his competition, they were after us. They weren't after our fighters. But when they would turn their nose in on us, they were a sitting duck because our fighters come right in behind them and knock them right down, regardless of what kind of airplane it was.
So we'll make sure if you guys, maybe I'll just pull this clip and put it on our website so people can go right to it, because he's using his hands to show the different attitude of the fighters. The one that blew me away was the P-38s. Basically, what he was trying to show with his hands, or did show with his hands, is imagine a bomber flying, with the bomber stream, and then ME-262 is going up to get behind these bombers to shoot him down. And he said these P-38s came in, went behind the bombers, behind the tail, turned 180, faced the ME-262 head on to attack it as this thing was coming up to attack our bomber streams. That must have looked incredibly heroic. It's like a cavalry charge. It's unbelievable. And these P-38s, they had long legs. They were probably the first fighter we had that had the legs to really escort the bombers, but they were used more in the Pacific than they were in the European theater.
Yeah.
And they had 650 caliber machine guns in the nose, located in the nose. So their cone of fire was unbelievable. And he just talked about, 3 or 4 of these coming around after one ME-262. It was really cool. And what's fascinating is Frank can describe these things like a pilot, because he is a pilot, even though he was the waist gunner, and he had a front row seat to watching these fighters and the type of tactics that they would use to keep these German fighters off his tail.
Yeah. So, real quick, because I've forgotten about the P-38 thing, and you're right. You do not hear about them fighting in Europe. They're mostly a Pacific theater plane. It's what they use to shoot down Admiral Yamamoto with P-38s, and they've got very long range. They're twin engine fighters, and the pilot sits in between, and they got a twin boom that connects to one stabilizer, one horizontal stabilizer. In Europe, though, I just was doing a little bit of research when he was talking. There were the P-38 fighter groups that were in England with the 8th Air Force, were the 20th, the 55th, the 364th, and the 479th fighter groups. The 78th and the 1st fighter groups also flew P-38s in England early, but both were moved out before becoming long-term fixtures. And the 14th fighter group also began in England before shifting to the Mediterranean. So there were quite a few, actually. And, all we ever hear about really are the P-51s and the P-47s.
Yep.
Yeah. And the P-47s had 8 50 cals on them. How crazy is that?
It's crazy.
But imagine, the P-38 having 6 in the nose.
Yeah.
So that plane had to almost stand still when you fired it.
It had a cone of fire, right? It didn't have to have intersecting fire like if they're in the wings. And in the book, Masters of the Air, Donald Miller talks about how effective the P-38s were early in the war when we didn't have long range fighter escorts, and everyone was asking for P-38s. And there weren't enough of them to go around. And because they did have long range, two things conspired to prolong our ability to have fighter escorts that would actually turn the tide of the air war, according to the book from Donald L. Miller. Number one was having the planes that had the legs to do it. There's a technical issue. The other was philosophical. Ira Aker, and others who were part of what was called the bomber mafia, who believed in strategic pinpoint bombing, that the bombers would always make it through, that they could defend themselves. They were so married to that theory that they were reluctant to ask for fighters. They were reluctant to bring them in. It was really an error of omission associated with behavioral psychology. It had nothing to do by the time late 1943 came along with actually having those fighters. So really interesting to hear him talk about the P-38s. We don't hear, with the interviews we've conducted, people talk about that very much. And then to see his hands, doing what pilots do with this is what they did. So I'm going to take this clip out and I'm going to put it on our website so people, if they don't want to listen or see the whole unadulterated interview, you can just click on it and see what he's saying. It's cool. Okay. I told you, fit of peak. What does it mean? And also a reminder to our audience, this is not the plane he flew over in. This is the plane that they would use for the vast majority of his missions. And this clip right here has several fascinating elements to it. So go ahead, Ryan.
I'll tell you the story because it's worth telling. We picked up a brand new B-17 in Kearney, as I told you. It was Army 063, which was the tail numbers. This was a brand new, shiny silver bird. It wasn't camouflaged. And of course, it wasn't armored. And when we got to Nuts Corner, Ireland, they took the airplane away from us. We thought we were going to keep it, and that was going to be named Fit a Peak. You know what Fit a Peak means, don't you?
No.
Peak means anger. Fit of anger is really what it meant. Anyway, I can't remember what the target was, but we were on our way back, and we were getting a lot of fire. We were above the clouds, and then we had to start looking for a place to put the bird down because it was in bad shape. Hydraulics were shot out. We were very low on fuel. Oxygen tanks were punctured. So Jim brought the airplane down through the clouds, and we started getting the hell shot out of us as soon as we started down. And when we broke out, the very instant we broke out, just like that, they stopped shooting at us. So we feel for sure that it was American fire down there that was shooting us, but they couldn't tell who was in the clouds. We landed on a little field in Seventon. It is now the main airport for the city of Brussels, called Seventon, 7 miles from Brussels. So Jim put the bird down on this little German airfield, but the Germans had been pushed out. But the runway was cratered with bombs that the Americans had dropped down on them. And it was a tough thing to find a decent spot to put the airplane.
Yeah.
We went bouncing across country. I didn't think we were ever going to stop. When we got out of our airplane and we look over the hedgerow, there's a B-17 tail sticking up in the air. And from where we were, because we didn't land properly, because we had to land as we could, we were on the opposite side of the field, and they had bulldozed this B-17 and shoved it over the hedgerow. Army 063.
That
Plane
plane.
you came over.
Yeah, that's the one we flew over. And that was the next time we saw it after we left it in Ireland. It was, and I remember when we got talking about it, Jim O'Leary to me said, let's go take a look at it. So we walked over there, and we walked up to the waist window on the right side, and the window had been blown out of the airplane. It was because it could have come out when it crash landed, because it did crash land. But I remember Jim's reached in that open window and he picked something off the ceiling, off the upper part of the airplane, and he said, "Look at this, Frank." And I looked over at it, and he was holding a piece of scalp by the hair that was stuck on the upper part of the airplane, probably, and he got hit in the head or something, the waist gunner, and blew him all over the inside of the airplane.
My God. Holy.
Okay, I don't have a whole lot to say about that.
Oh my. What are the odds that, first off, they're lucky they didn't die because they were so shot full of holes. They got to land on and basically an airfield that has been abandoned or by the Germans. They're in Europe, right? They're 7 kilometers outside of Brussels. And then you land and you're like, thank God we survived that. And then you see the tail number of the plane that you flew over in, and you go to check it out, and there's pieces of people in it.
That's okay. If that would have made it into Masters of the Air, people would be like, come on,
Totally.
What are the odds?
Yes.
This is not real. Come on, they totally made that up. They're stitching 2 stories together. No, this is actually a real thing that happened to this guy and this crew with the same pilot that flew that plane over from the US. I mean, and the other thing, real quick, I had to chuckle when he talked about trying to come in and land on this damn pockmarked runway.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, well, how much of a double-edged sword is it when your own damn military is so effective that when the front moves past, good luck trying to find a place to land now.
Yeah,
Thanks, American bombers,
Yeah, you can't use that. So, I mean, and here's another one of these faux pas that we made early in our interviewing, whatever you want to call it, experience. As I wanted to ask him, well, how did you get back to your base? What mission was this? How early on in your 30 missions, as we would learn, that you flew, did this occur? And we never asked any of those questions.
No, we were too rigid. I
We
was too
suck,
rigid in our
dude.
questioning. Yeah, I know.
We're terrible. The audience, you just be thankful that we can share with you what we've been able to do. It could have been so much better, but you know what?
Oh,
I'm happy with what we got, and we're not done. We've got 4 more clips, and the next one, it's going to be a departure, right? No grossness on this one. It's kind of an interesting story about the British people he would get to know over there.
Well, we played basketball, football, baseball. I mean, not very often. They wanted us to keep us, occupied. We used to ride our bikes to the local pub, which was about 5 or 6 miles away from the base. And but the main thing that we did is practice. We would practice flying formation, pilot checks. When there wasn't anything else, they'd go to get a check pilot and assign him a bunch of crews, and he'd have to check out the pilots. They just land and take off all day long. So, and one of my favorite things was with Lou Reed, who was the co-pilot. Lou and I are very close friends. We're both single. Most of the other guys were married. So anyway, every time we could get a B-17 coming out of the hangar, we would take it up to slow time the engines. If there were an engine that was rehung, and then I used to get a lot of stick time because Lou would get in the left seat and put me in the right seat, and I'd be able to fly the airplane.
How would you perceive the American attitudes towards the local British population?
Well, it always appeared to me that the English put up with us because I think they knew that if they didn't, and if we weren't there, they were going to lose that war. Hands down. Their Air Force was about shot out of the air. And I think you heard me tell 2 Sundays ago about the girl that I was out with, who saved my life when the guy was trying to stab me with a stiletto he had in his hands. She just reached up there and grabbed his arm and twisted it over, and he fell on the floor, and she put her foot right in his face, man. And then I made the mistake later in the day when I said to her, we're fighting the wrong war. We should be over in the South Pacific. And she said to me, what do you mean? I said, well, we're fighting your war.
oh,
No.
I should never have said that.
No.
That was the wrong thing to say. So that date didn't last much longer.
she was fit a peak at that point.
Yeah, lucky he didn't get his ass kicked. So that was one of the stories he shared with Don Johnson at the Commemorative Air Force that he just retold, where he got in a bit of a trouble at the bar. Some local bloke was going to stick him, and his date, his British girlfriend, just did some MMA crap on his ass and smoked the dude. Unbelievable.
He's out with Mary Poppins, and she just pulls some ninja crap on him right then and there. Isn't that awesome?
Oh my God.
And I got to make one comment. At the very beginning of the clip, he said, yeah, the pub was about 5-6 miles away. We'd ride our bikes there. Okay, wait a second. Okay. I've ridden a bike 6 miles before. Okay. And I was very young when I did it. Okay.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine riding those English bikes, which probably were squeaking and they're all rickety and stuff. They weren't
Piece of crap,
easy.
single speed,
They
no
weren't
brakes.
made out of carbon fiber or anything like that, And then you get a snoot full at the pub.
Yeah.
And you got to ride 6 miles back.
Yeah.
No way, dude. No
way. They did, dude. And I have a feeling that the 19-year-old version of Ryan would have did the same damn thing.
I would have just found a ditch outside and fell asleep, curled up or maybe a nice British lady, that
Oh,
would
yeah.
have, let me go home and sleep
Yeah.
on a couch,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'm sure
yes,
that's, yeah. Right. Sleep at a
yeah.
At any rate, so, so the next clip, so he flew his 30 missions. We just heard a little bit of behind the scenes action, what it was like on the base and some of the British women he met. Now he's going to talk about the end of the war.
After the war ended, how did you feel when you heard about VE and VJ Day?
Well, I remember being in San Antonio at the San Antonio Aviation Cadet Center, and we wanted to go to town and have a few drinks and raise some hell. As an ex-combat student pilot, I had a permanent pass. We were allowed to go off the base anytime we wanted, as long as we weren't in violation of what we needed to be doing. And I can remember that night that we couldn't get out the gate. They wouldn't let us out the gate, anybody, because they were afraid what was going to happen to that town. So we all got together and we made a mad dash for the fence, and we never stopped when we got to the fence.
He broke out.
One guy after another was on that fence and running right across it, and everything just went down.
Break out, baby.
I don't know how many. Must have been 100 guys. They just all running all over.
Tonight is going to be a jailbreak.
And I went downtown. I can remember this at St. Mary's Bridge, it's St. Mary River, I believe. I was up on that bridge, and I was sick to my stomach. I was laying over the bridge and thrown up into the water down below. Oh, I was sick. Man. I didn't hear the rest.
What experiences from the war stand out to you after all this time?
Well, I learned that when you work as a team, you can do so much more than if you try to do it individually. And as you know, I created the REMAX organization here in the state of Texas. And my wife and I started with no agents and wound up with close to 5,000 agents in the state, and sold the company this past summer. And I sold it to one of my key employees. And he'd been with me for over 20 years. He runs it now. And it's a monstrosity. It's doing over $1 billion a month in sales. And it profitably, it'll make Richard, I'd say close to $5 million a year net.
Pretty good.
It turned out to be a very good company. So what I'm setting up now is a servicing company that'll run parallel with REMAX. And we will go to builders and get listings and get them to build houses for us, and then we'll put them into the REMAX offices. Continue to do the work you're doing. It's needed desperately. A short while, 10 years from now, we'll probably all be gone. I'll be 90 years old. One more thing I will say to you. Stick close to me for the simple reason that I'm heavily involved with the museum in their effort over there, which is exactly what you guys are doing. And I want to get more of you together, and I want to then go from school to school and present what you've learned after you've interviewed all these veterans. We've got to get the students made aware of what it has taken to get to this point.
That was refreshing to hear that. I'd forgotten he was the first guy that really talked to us about really valuing this new endeavor that we were starting to get into and really seeing the value of it.
You are 100% correct. I remember there was actually some correspondence, email between he and you and him, me and you and him about, working. The museum he's talking about is, I think, the 8th Air Force Museum. And he was in correspondence with some generals and stuff there. And I've got it in this packet that we have here. And he was basically trying to come up with materials. And I have some of the material right here. There's one, I'll see if I can hold it for the camera. It's called Honoring the American Past.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh.
Where this was designed to be a kind of a nice, quick, easy read for high school students to spend a little bit of time talking about World War II because he felt like over time it was covered less and less and less. And he's right. And so not only was he the first person, and it's the second interview we've ever conducted, and we've got someone of means, we'll get to that in a minute, who wanted to work with us to help us educate school age kids on this. Um, he would, after the war, end up going into real estate, and he would found the Texas Regional Remax headquarters, which was a multi-million-dollar business endeavor that he ended up selling a year or so before we conducted this interview. And when we interviewed him, he was 80, I think, and he was still working on side projects. What I didn't remember, Ryan, is less than a year later, on December 11th, 2004, remember we interviewed him on February 26th of 03, he would pass away at the age of 81.
I didn't realize it was that quick.
I didn't either. I remember hearing about it through the Commemorative Air Force, but I did not know that he had passed away so quickly, because I remember these were early days, and here we got this guy. He lives on an airport. He's a millionaire. He really supports what we're doing. He has a passion for educating kids on this, and so did we. And we corresponded with him, not trying to get money from him, but he asked if we could help him in this endeavor, and we were trying to work out a way that we could, because we wanted to, and we still do, and we would still do whatever we can do to help educate kids on some of these stories that we heard. But he would pass away a little less than a year later. And in fact, just one more thing, his obituary would be featured on the business section of the Houston Chronicle.
Well, there's a big splash.
Yeah, it wasn't tucked away somewhere. He was a pillar of the business community in Houston.
Wow, that kind of derailed my thoughts. I didn't realize that. That's pretty big deal. I guess one of the things that I was going to bring up is that, and he kind of alluded to it, but I don't think he came out and really said it in the interview, but he was very instrumental as a donator to the 8th Air Force Museum in Savannah, Georgia.
Yep.
And that's that book that Tony was just holding up was he had cases of these things. He showed us. Whenever Tony and I were at his house, he took us out into his hangar and showed us his plane. And he also had all these boxes of these things, and he was donating them. He wanted to get a education program going in the schools. And, really, that really has evolved into kind of, the mantra that Tony and I, the mission that Tony and I feel like that we're on, and that is to continue to perpetuate these stories and to hopefully get younger generations to understand where the World War II event fits in U.S. history and world history, and how it impacts their daily lives every day, and why they should really learn from this era of history and how hugely important it is. So, not to monologue too much there, but I'm wondering, Tony, if we could maybe get a hold of some Frank's family and talk to them about maybe seeing if we can pick up the torch with that.
In fact, it's interesting because I'm looking at a letter that he wrote to you via email. Of course, the letter he wrote back to you looks like a really professional letter, not just a, hey, here's a quick note. It's addressed to you. He's got your address. He has his address on there, and it starts off with, "Dear Ryan, thank you so much for your email. I've read it and will pass it along to Mr. C.J. Roberts." We got his information right here, and a few others, who is the president of the mighty 8th Air Force Museum at that time. Remember, this is 2003. So I think there's enough here where we could probably, maybe reconnect with them and see what's going on. But I remember for a time we were really excited about, hey, man, this could really take off. Maybe we ought to redirect our efforts away from interviewing veterans to educating children. But that didn't happen. He passed away. We continued on the path that I'm very happy that we went on, but it would be interesting to reconnect. According to his obituary, he was survived at this time, of course, by his wife of 58 years, Jean DeCicco, and their daughters, Jessica and Deborah. So Jessica DeCicco and Deborah Masterson. So any rate, it was these were the early days for us. Things were really burning bright. We weren't sure where this is going to go. I can't believe that, 23 years later, here we are, still close friends, still associated with this, still trying to evangelize these stories, and hopefully in a way that can touch more people. And I'm just, God bless Frank for having us in his home and sharing his story with us. He was a very interesting individual.
Well, and I'll say this, I think his vision of making this educational, I think really was the first that it really popped into our consciousness that, yeah, there is an educational fit here.
Yep.
And perhaps, we should try to get involved and do whatever we can. And so hats off to Frank. Too bad we couldn't have collaborated with him some more.
Yeah.
But, time stepped in and here we are.
We have a different path. And one more thing about that before we sign off. We talked about then, because back then in 2003, it wasn't uncommon for World War II vets like Frank to go to high schools and middle schools and talk to them about their experience. Yeah. And we talked about there's going to be a day when those men will not be available to do this. And maybe we could act as a surrogate for them. So we should put our heads together and see if we can put something together that can be presented maybe remotely. Maybe we can take some of a montage of some of these experiences that focus on specific elements of that period of time that can be played at middle and high school in ways that they can't do it anymore. Maybe we can bring those voices in from these interviews. But if our audience has any ideas on how we can do this, we have a Facebook page on The Warrior Next Door. We have the warriornextdoor.com website where you can leave comments there.
If there are any teachers out there that are listening,
absolutely
reach out to Tony and I. Maybe we can run a, no pun intended, pilot program to try to figure out how we can get some footing here and make a difference in the schools.
All right. And with that being said, we're going to sign out. I hope you guys enjoyed this. My name is Tony Lupo. Okay, good.
I'm Ryan Fairfield.
And thank you for being along on this journey on one of our earlier interviews, and we hope you enjoyed it. And with that being said,
let's
try.
There you go. That's better. You just got to have less volume behind
less emphasis on the second caw.
The lucky listeners now get to hear it in its entirety. So,
okay, we'll stop recording. Well, we certainly hope you enjoyed the Frank DeCicco series. It was something that we recorded very early on, back in 2003. We have not heard these clips since then in over 2 decades, and there were certain elements of it that, quite frankly, we had forgotten about. So we really enjoy being able to resurrect these experiences, these memories of these wonderful human beings who we had a chance to get to know and interact with, and we hope you appreciate it as well. Our audience continues to grow, and we cannot thank you enough for the support that you provide by just listening in. Please, if you enjoy our content and want us to keep pushing forward with it, please hit subscribe and or go to your podcast rating system on the bottom and give us 5-star reviews and tell us how great we are. And if you hate us, then just kind of turn it all off and ignore us. We don't need the bad juju. So until next time, Warrior Next Door listeners,